Hi everyone, I'm Allie Buchman with the Potomac Bead Company, and I'm going to be working today on this Boho Chic Druzy necklace. It's a long necklace that you can use either leather, cording, beads. The example I did in leather, and the one that I'm doing here for you, I'm going to be using some chain. The feature in this necklace is the Druzy agate slice. So this Druzy sliced bead has holes in it, and unlike the ones that I've used on some previous videos that are cabochons, the hole in this bead makes it a little bit more versatile. Also, with this Druzy, it does have a really thick surface, so it has a really thick rise. That's caused me to kind of question what to do with it. We've wrapped them in wire, we've done different things, and then I kind of got inspired and decided to do this band of peyote on this side of the Druzy slice. So this is 25 by 30 millimeters, and it comes in a variety of colors. I'm going to be working here with the green and have this turquoisey aqua blue one that I've already completed. For the materials for this, if you need any of them, they're going to appear on the left-hand side here with some drop downs. You can click on any of those to purchase from me online, or you can print out the list and take it into one of your local Potomac Bead Company and get the materials that way. For the thread for doing our peyote band around this boho necklace, we're going to be using 0.006 wildfire thread, and I'm using the green color. The green's going to fit really well with my green Druzy, and I also used it with the blue as well. If you don't have the green thread, definitely a get. I use it 90% of the time. It matches with a lot of my colors. In addition to my thread, I have my thread burner or my cord cutter. This is the wildfire one. You can also use a thread zap or thread zap ultra. Those all do the same thing. And I have my scissors here if I need to do some trimming. So these are the snip and slip scissors here. And the slip and snips there, they just kind of go right back in, great for traveling. In addition to those little tools sitting around, you might want to use some super new glue, which is just a fast drying super glue if you tend to glue. You don't have to, you can just use the thread burner in the place. In addition to that, the hardware that I'm going to be using, I have two wire protectors. The nice thing with this design is that the actual casing just moves a tiny bit from side to side, but doesn't pop from the bottom or the top because we're actually building the peyote around the wire protectors. So a must is two wire protectors to go through the holes of the Druzy. I also have some chain here. In this example, I've used some leather that I've made and then stuck on one of our ceramic beads and finished it off with one of the multicolored tassels that's about 1.5 inches long. And instead of doing that, I thought I'd switch it up. Since I've been wearing this one a lot, I'd make a different design to wear as well. This, I'm going to use the chain. I'm using the Italian fancy rounded chain in the antique brass color. And I'm also going to use the chain to make my tassel at the bottom. As far as a bead to sit on top, rather than using the ceramic look, I'm going to throw a lampwork bead in there and use one of those as well. In addition to the different beads that are going to be used just for aesthetics, the beads that are going to be needed are your delica beads. So the delica beads here that I've used in the example are just the Duracoat galvanized silver 1831 as the DB number. I'm going to be switching it up because I'm using the antique brass, and we're using 0103, the dark topaz rainbow luster. So I'm going to be using that around as well. When we get to building this, you do want to have handy a size 10 needle. If you prefer to work with a short needle or a long needle, you can do this. This is just a pony style English beading needle. You could also use a tulip needle, Miyuki needle, whatever you're most comfortable with using. But we're only going to be going back through each delica bead 2 times with our thread, so you're not going to need a super fine needle. So a size 10 will work for this project. To get started, we're going to add the chain after the fact and kind of add that in as we go. We'll grab some jump rings if we need to do that. And then we're going to start first by pouring out some of our delica beads and getting our wire protectors as well. For my top beads, I have some of the lampwork beads here. Our lampwork beads come on some strands, and some of them come mixed. A good mix to use that you could get a couple beads off if you are going with the green would be item number 40838, which is a peach and green lampwork beads. Other ones, if you are searching around on the site, 40830 and 40842. Also, if you just go to the lampwork page, you can check out some of those different ones if you do want that look of the glass bead to sit on top. We also have a bunch of great gemstones that you could use in its place as well. Just a little trick here while I'm getting my thread ready to start my project. I have a pair of bent nose pliers here that I'm using just to squash down the end of 3 feet of beading thread, 3 to 4 feet, and I'm going to take that. Once I squash it down, it actually pushes it apart. You can see there at the end. That's going to make it easier for me to thread my needle. So if you haven't done that in the past, it makes it really easy. If you need to, sometimes you can go in then with pliers and grab to pull the thread through, or I have fingernails that I can just kind of pull it through. So that's how we're going to get started with our thread and our needle. Like I said, we're going to dump out our seed beads here into little piles. And once we have our seed beads dumped out, we're actually going to create a stop bead on our thread. So for the stop bead, I'm going to go into my container here of silver because I have those there right near me from my other example. And I'm going to put a silver bead onto my needle. I'm going to let it drop down to the base of the thread that I just put the needle on. And I'm going to leave about 2 inches at the very, very end of the thread. Take my needle and thread back through that stop bead 2 times. And pull that thread through. Once you have that stop bead on there, we're going to get ready to start the project. To actually start the project, we're going to be going and using our wire protectors first. So the wire protectors are going to hang out on either side of the opening hole on our druzy here. That hole and using the wire protectors is what's going to help us to make sure that that casing of the peyote stitch around the boho druzy pendant here is going to stay to one side or the other. If we just made the casing go the whole way around, it's going to not sit on the side. So we're locking it into place with those wire protectors that we're adding. To add the wire protector, I'm going to sew through the wire protector up the side. If you haven't used wire protectors, they're a U shape and they have little, almost a little tube-like area on each side. That's going to hold our thread in, and then the thread's going to sit in that U shape, so it's actually not touching any other component that we add on. I'm going to bring my thread and needle down the other side of that wire protector. And I usually just pinch with my fingers and have them kind of one right on top of the end. As you get to the end, you want to pull slowly to make sure that thread actually goes and sits in that little U channel. Once you have that, you're going to string through your druzy and out the top here. And then on the other side, I'm also going to add the wire protector in the same fashion, going in at the bottom of the U and then down the top here, almost like an N shape, I should say, rather than the U, upside down U. Once you have that down, you want to pull nice and tight so that way it goes right next to the druzy. Those are going to kind of lock in place there. If the druzy has a big hole like this, it might fall to the side a little bit. That's okay. I'm going to go back through my druzy, pulling the thread through, and I'm going to reinforce and go through that again. Most of the tension on the piece is going to be on these wire protectors because that's how it's going to be held together. So I am going to go through these twice. Let's move that tail out of the way. I'm going to come down the other side, make sure to pull my thread tight and don't go through that tail. Then we're going to string right through the druzy all the way to the other side and go through the wire protector again. You're going to end up then with 3 strands of thread going through the druzy and 2 strands of thread going through each wire protector. Once I go through the pendant 2 times, and come out the other side here. My thread is going to be coming out on the side of the bead stop. So that stop bead right there, it's almost sitting in the middle of the hole, blocking the hole, and the wire protectors are sitting right on the ends. As we get into the project, if you want to, you can kind of pinch those closed. Right now we're going to keep them open a little bit because we don't want them to fall into the holes. I want to be able to stitch around them. The first thing we're doing now that we're coming out of our cab here is, or our bead, I'm sorry, is we're going to add a number of seed beads, a number of those delicas along the side. Even though they are 25 by 35 millimeter, each druzy, because it's natural, is going to be a little bit different in shape. So it may require a different number of seed beads as we're going along the sides. How to determine how many seed beads you need are actually just to pick up the delicas on your needle and string them, and we're going to lay them right along the side of our project. I do want an even number as I'm picking up, so whether or not you want to count now as you pick up, or just string a bunch of beads and then count after, you can do that as well. I'm just going to choose to add them all together, and then we're going to count, and when I count, I want to make sure that I have an even number. If I don't have an even number, I'm going to add a bead to make an even number rather than take away a bead. So you can see you're going to line it up right along there, pushing those beads right up to that hole, line it up right along the project, and I'm going to keep going and then get my final count for my side, adding a bead if I need to in order to get an even number because we want to work with even count peyote. I've strung my beads on here, and when I got done with stringing and lined them up, I actually had 33 beads. I went ahead and added an extra so that way I would have 34. The easiest way that I have found is to actually move them with my needle as I'm counting and count in groups of 2. You do want to count 2 times just to make sure you really do have that even number. Once you have the perfect amount on the sides, either 34 or with this one that's a little bit bigger, I had 36. You want to go in and we're going to sew through the wire protector at the opposite side of the stop bead. To do that, you may need to pull up a little bit on the wire protector and slide your needle underneath so you can sew through the end of the wire protector. As I sew through the wire protector, it may be getting a little bit tight to get through there because you already have 2 threads through the side and we're now putting a 3rd. Once you have it through that wire protector, just give one more tight pull and you can make sure that that's a perfect amount going around the side of the druzy. I'm going to come down the other side of the wire protector, bringing my needle out right after it. I'm not going through the piece, I'm going right beside it. Pulling slowly to make sure it gets caught in there, and then giving it a tight pull in order to lock it in there. If that happens to you and it pulls out a little bit, the wire protectors are not soldered on the ends. Just take your pliers, give it a little pinch, and close that up again and redo that. As we get to the other side, we want to make sure that we have another count that works for us. Just because one side has 34 does not mean the other side will have 34. It may have 32, it may have 36, or fewer or less. This is because the sides and the holes are not necessarily evenly spaced. So I'm going to go ahead and do that again where I sew through the wire protector, hold it on. We're going to add more beads on the other side. So as I get to the other side here, I have 34 beads again on this side. And what I'm going to do is mimic what I did on the other side, stringing through the wire protector. The stop bead is there, you're just going to kind of ignore that. You can tilt the wire protector to the back in order to string through. And I'm going to string through that wire protector, coming out the other side of the wire protector, and also going through the first of the delica beads that I added on the other side. So I'm going to go through the first delica bead and come out of that delica bead. That's going to start our peyote stitch. When we get to the side of it then, where the wire protector is at the very end, we'll work on it there. But you can see I'm pulling slowly just to make sure that thread gets trapped in that U. And we're going to sew through the first of our delicate beads. Move that stop bead out of the way. So your thread's coming out right there of that first delicate bead. Once I'm out of that first delicate bead, I'm going to start my peyote stitch. So this will move around a little bit. That's okay. It's going to get locked in as we do our next rows of our peyote stitch. Right here, if you haven't done peyote, you may want to stop this video, watch another video on the peyote stitch, and then come back to it. But peyote stitch is very simple, and it's very easy to learn with delicas. I'm coming out of the first bead. I'm going to add a bead, and then I'm going to sew through the third bead. Right now I'm going to go through all the odd count beads. So I'm adding another one. Now I'm going to add another bead, skip over bead number 4, and sew through bead number 5. As I do this, generally I'm going to put some pressure on the strip here so the pressure is not going into the wire protectors. Add another bead, skip bead number 6, and go through 7. I want to make sure all of these beads, and that's why I'm putting my finger here also, that all the beads that I'm adding stay to the back side of the pendant. I don't want them flipping one side or another. Eventually we're going to be adding to both sides, but right now we're just adding on to the back side here. Add another bead, skip number 8, go through number 9. So I'm going to do this the whole way along for that row of 34 to create that row of peyote right along the first side. As I come around here and I've added that first little strip of peyote, I'm going to add my last bead, and I'm sewing through the last bead that I need to sew through. So I'm passing through that second to last bead. When I come out here on the side, I have another bead to add, but then I have the wire protector. So what I'm going to actually be doing is I'm going to be adding beads and skipping straight across the wire protector. In place of the wire protector, I'm going to be adding 4 beads right next to it. So you're adding 4 beads at once, and then I'm going to skip over to the opposite side and pick up the second bead in the line of the peyote stitch there. What that's going to do is mimic what we've just done, where the peyote is going to be on the side, but this is going to lock everything into place. It also pulls the wire protector in exactly where you want it to be. This is going to give you a nice polished line where the peyote stitch will continue just like as it should be in your project. By adding 4, it also keeps that even count peyote. As I'm working now, I'm going to come down the other side, doing the peyote stitch as well, and you can already see that last bead, that 4th bead that we added, sits right on the side here of that wire protector, and we're going to continue on with our peyote stitch then. Adding a bead, passing through a bead. I'm going to do that the whole way then along this other side, adding my peyote stitch. And we're going to do the same thing that we just did, adding the 4 beads in place as we get to the wire protector at the bottom end of the pendant. So right now, just continue right like we've been doing. Again, those 4 beads were added to the back of the wire protector. Remember, we're working towards the back, and then we'll flip and work on the front side as well. But right now, we're going to keep to the back. So I'm to the bottom side of the pendant here, and I'm coming out of the last bead. So when we were on the top, because we're doing even count, it's going to be the opposite. We have 2 right away near the top on either side of the wire protector. Here on either side of the wire protector, we finish our end and we just have 1 bead on either side. I'm still going to add my beads in here. So I have 4 beads that I'm going to add. But instead of going through one of the outer beads, I'm going to use that to finish my peyote row. So I'm coming out of the last bead on the first side of the wire protector, going to the first bead on the other side of the wire protector. That's going to add those 4 beads in there, just like the bottom, to cradle in that wire protector. Now what I'm going to do is step up. So if you're unfamiliar with peyote, we are actually doing almost like a tubular or a circular peyote. We're coming out of the first bead, and we're going to go through the first bead that we added in what is actually that third row of peyote. The first band is actually 2 rows of peyote at once. So I'm going through that first bead that was added as we started to go around and create the peyote stitch. Once I'm coming out there, I'm going to go the whole way around the band, adding my peyote in. And when we get to the top here, where the wire protector is, I'll show you what we're going to do where the extra beads were added. So I'm just going to continue my peyote stitch. Now it's very easy because there's already a bead that's sticking up. Again, you want to make sure that everything that you're doing right now is to the back side of the pendant. If you do flip over to the front and it curls, it'll just make a little bit of wave in your pendant, and it won't look as nice along the sides. You want it to be a seamless line when you're looking at it on the side there. So continue adding that row of peyote here, getting that 4th row started and added and in. When we get to the top, we'll pick back up and show you how we're going to deal with the 4 extra beads that we just added in. As you get to the end here, and we're getting to the portion where we added our peyote stitch in, we're going to add a bead right at the end here where it's supposed to be, and go through that first of those 4 beads that you added. Push those beads down so they stay in place. And then what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to sew straight through those 2 beads that are added on the side and go through. So I'm coming out the very end there where I need to add one of my new peyote beads. So I added a bead where it's supposed to be, and then I'm going to sew through all 4 of those beads. So I've sewed through one, the first one, and I'm going to sew through the other 3 as well. So right now there's just going to be 1 row of beads right along the back there that is just going to sit on the peyote stitch. Along the side then, coming down, adding in my next row of my peyote stitch. Oops. You're just going to continue on with that peyote stitch. If you notice that there's a big gap back here, you may not have added enough beads in your initial row. The way to make up that is just to add a 5th bead in right along the back where you have the 4 beads. You could add a 5th bead in right there and no one would notice as you're sewing along. So I've just sewed right through all 4 of those beads and continuing on with the peyote stitch until we get to the bottom. And we're going to sew through some of those as well without adding any extra new beads. So the peyote is going to be on the sides of the project. Along the back here, we'll make up for the peyote as we come around one more time, adding that thicker band of peyote. So right now, just sewing straight through those 4 beads and continuing on with your peyote stitch. You want the sides to look nice because that's really what you're going to see. If the top looks a little bit jumbled and you're not super sure how you're doing and how it's going, you really want to keep it as flat and flush as you can with the project, although it's going to be covered up by beads and with your tassel or with your chain at the bottom. So don't stress out too much about that. You want the sides to look like a nice seamless line as we're working with it. And actually, I was very inspired with this. The silver one that I created looks very much, and I wanted to make it as seamless as possible as the band on my watch. So that was kind of the inspiration for the end of this bead here. So you're going to continue making those sides nice and flat, adding in that last peyote, and then I'll show you what we do when we get to the back. As we get to the bottom here, here are my 4 beads that I added. I'm right beside the last bead or the first bead that I went through before I added those 4. I'm going to add 1 more bead, and then I'm going to sew straight across through those 4 beads that I added here at the base. So just like the other side. When I come to the other side, I need to add 1 more bead to finish my peyote row. I'm going to go through that first bead that I was going through at the very end. So that first bead on that previous row, and then we're going to step up by going through the first bead that was added on that 4th row of peyote stitch. So when you're done, you're going to look like a seamless line with those 4 beads kind of hanging out there in the middle, and then 2 beads finishing off on either end of that peyote stitch. We're going to add one more pass of the peyote stitch to kind of sit right along that back line there. I'll show you what we're going to do as we get to the top and as we get to the bottom. As we get to the back side here, I'm coming out right before those 4 beads that were added. And what I'm going to do is actually a 2 drop peyote. So I'm going to pick up 2 beads, skip over the first 2, and sew through the 3rd. That's going to line 2 beads up there to look like they're part of this peyote stitch. Then all I'm going to do is continue on with that stitch and the peyote. So you're just going to see 2 beads there in one of the stitches rather than just one. Continuing on then with your peyote stitch right down the line. Very simple. So you just do that 2 drop, which is 2 beads at once, right at the top, at the start of those 4 beads that were added. I'm going to continue down the side then, finishing up that peyote row. And then when we get to the bottom, we're going to do a similar 2 drop, and then we're going to switch over and start working on the front. I'm at the bottom now, right near the stop bead, and I'm coming to that group of 4 that I added. And what I'm going to do when I'm there is I'm actually going to do that 2 drop again. So I'm going to add 2 of my delicas, skip over 2 beads at once, and sew through that 3rd bead in line. That's again going to look just like we have 2 there at the side. Then I'm going to continue finishing out my peyote stitch by adding 1 more bead and then 1 other to complete that missing gap there. You can see that gapped row, and that's going to be the last one of this row. I'm then going to be done with the back. So this is all that I'm adding on that back side of that peyote stitch. I'm now going to come to the front and add some more of the banding on the front. How much you want to add is really up to you, and how many rows you want to do. That's completely up to you. I'm going to get to the front by sewing through the peyote in the opposite direction. So my thread's coming out, going here towards the right. I'm going to sew back through the bead that sits right on top of the bead that I'm coming out of, and I'm going to sew in the opposite direction. So I'm going to sew my needle towards the left. What that's going to do is create that little loop there of thread, and that thread is going to disappear as I pull it between those 2 beads. I'm then going to sew back through the bead that's right below it on a diagonal, and I'm going to come out right next to my wire protector through the first bead on the side of the wire protector. That's going to bring me right next to the wire protector, and I'm going to get ready to jump from one side of the wire protector to the other side. In order to do this, if your stop bead is hanging out there, you're going to want to pull it and kind of get it out of the way, taking it off completely. If you need to, you can put a needle on this thread in order to take that off, or push the thread back through in the opposite direction to get that stop bead completely off and out of the way. Once that stop bead is off and out of the way, just kind of hold that thread back for a moment. I'm going to do the same thing that I did on the other side. So you're not going to want to overthink this. You get used to that count of 4, use that count of 4 again. So I have 4 beads, and that's kind of the perfect spacing to add beads on the side of the space of the wire protector. This is also going to cover up and close up the holes of the bead. You're not going to be able to see them. I'm going to add those 4 beads and sew through the first bead on the opposite side of the wire protector and out. That's going to lay those 4 beads right on the side of the wire protector, casing in the wire protector right inside the peyote stitch. I'm coming out of the first bead, which is a set of 2. I'm going to go out the outermost bead, which is one of the sets of 3. When you're looking across, coming out that set of 3, that 3rd bead, the tail wants to get knotted in there, and I'm just going to let it. Now I'm going to go through and add my peyote stitch. When I get to the other side, same deal. Coming out the bead next to the wire protector, I'm going to add 4 beads and go into the bead on the opposite side of the wire protector. And then we're going to continue with peyote. And I'll do about 3 rows of peyote on the outside since this cap has a pretty large rise. As I'm finishing right along that side, I'm coming out of the bead that's closest to the wire protector. It was the very first bead that was added as we added along the side. And then I'm going to go into the first bead that was added on the opposite side of the wire protector. We've been doing 4 beads at a time, but because of the way that this is placed and the spacing that's involved, we're actually only going to add 2 beads this time. So I've added 2 beads onto my needle and thread, and then I'm going to sew through that first bead on the other side. That's going to pull that right in there and make the wire protector just part of that peyote stitch. Continue on adding your peyote stitch right along the sides, and when we get to those 4 that we added right along the bottom, we'll pick up and show you how we went through those 4 one more time. So back to the bottom here, I'm coming out the first of the 4 beads that I added to go around the side of the wire protector. I'm going to do that 2 drop where I add 2 beads at once, and then I'm going to sew through the 4th bead, skipping the 2nd and the 3rd of those 3 that I added. It's going to decorate the side there with 2 beads, and I'm just going to continue on my peyote stitch. As I continue on the stitch, I'm going to finish by adding 1 more bead, and if you have to add wire or thread like me, you can do so. I usually don't like to use too much thread on camera because it takes forever for me to pull it through. I'm going to sew through my last bead right there, step up, and continue around for 1 or 2 more rows of my peyote stitch. Again, this has a pretty deep rise, so I might actually do 2 more rows, which is a little bit more than I did on the previous one. But you're going to play that by ear based on the rise of your sliced agate or whatever you're wrapping. As I get to the top here where I just added my 2 beads, I have my last bead on for my peyote stitch row, and I'm going to sew through both beads without adding any beads. Then I'm going to continue on with my peyote stitch right along the project. So you're just adding those, or you're just sewing straight through both of those beads, not adding any as you go. We're going to continue with our peyote stitch around the edge, straight through to the bottom, and then back up to the top to finish that last row of peyote. As I get to the bottom of the pendant where I did that 2 drop peyote, I'm going to add 1 bead in to finish my peyote row right there, and I'm going to sew through both of those 2 drop beads without adding any additional beads, and then just continue on with my peyote stitch. When I get finished that row, I'm going to step up by going through the first bead that was added of that very last row of peyote. I'm going to continue around 1 more time. When I get to the top here, I'm going to add 2 beads in right where that opening is. So right where that opening is that those 2 beads were that we went back through, you're going to add 2 beads in and continue back around. We're going to finish our peyote stitch out then, and we'll be completely done with this portion of our pendant. As I'm finishing up my project, I got all of those ends of my peyote stitch finished and right around. I'm taking my needle and thread and I'm just going to sew back through the project a little bit. I'm sewing through the interior rows of the peyote stitch, making sure I don't see any of the thread exposed. But what this is doing is it's locking the beads in place and the thread, and I'm not going to have to actually glue the thread in. So I'm just running it up through. You can also switch directions and run it back the other way. Then I'm just going to burn the thread off after I've gone back through the project. The tension points for the actual necklace are going to be on the wire protectors. They're not going to be on this peyote since the peyote is not going to be actually connected to the necklace anywhere. Once I have that, I'm going to go in with my thread burner and I'm going to burn down my thread. I'm going to hold and pull some tension away from the thread, burn it with a thread burner, and when it's nice and short like that, I'm going to take the thread burner and use it to ball up the end of it, creating a stop bead. So that little thread end is going to stop it. I'm going to burn it down just small enough so I don't see it in between the beads. If you had any connection points or your starter threads, you can also go ahead and get rid of those at this point. I usually like to burn them down short and then ball them up. You could have done the same thing with these thread ends, starting at the start and finish of the peyote, running that back through the project a little bit, and that would have gotten that there as well. And I just want to burn down, making sure I'm not burning any of the interior thread that's running in between the project. Now that I have that peyote on the exterior of this agate slab, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add my little beads and chain for my connection here. What I forgot to do in the beginning was mention that you're going to need 2 jump rings in order to do that. So I'm going to get out my 2 jump rings, and then we're going to be using about 2.5 feet of chain. Whatever chain you're using, I'm going to use the same chain for the necklace portion as well as the tassel portion. Because I am adding some beads above and at the top of the druzy as well with those lampwork beads, you can either do this with a little piece of beading wire and crimp beads, or an actual piece of bendable wire like a German style or like an art wire. So I've grabbed a piece of 22 gauge artistic wire in the gunmetal bronze color. So I have that here on my spool. I didn't have any jump rings or wire head pins or eye pins in that antique brass color, so I just went with some raw wire. And all I did was make a loop and coiled it onto the wire protector and slid one of my beads on. I've cut my chain first piece to 24 inches. And at the top here, I'm going to grab my round nose pliers, make a loop right above my bead. If you need help with any of these simple wire working techniques, I've got lots of videos for those as well. You can watch that. And I'm going to roll that loop down so it's nice and close to that bead because I don't want a lot of space in between. And I've just chosen to use one of the beads. I'm going to grab the end of the chain now, right into that loop that we have going on the long piece of wire. I'm going to pop that chain right in to that loop. So you may need to open up that loop that you've created just a little bit, sliding it to the side. Pop one end of chain in, and then the other end of chain in. The nice thing is this is a long necklace, so it's one continuous piece of wire, so you don't need a clasp. On the other end here, I am going to take this wire, because it is 22 gauge and it's fairly thin, and I'm going to coil that wire right around at the top of the bead, coiling it around to make that loop closed so my chain cannot pop off. I'm going to cut that down short, and these are the Sparkle Tool Set cutters. They're my favorite cutters to use. And then I have that first portion of my necklace completed. If you wanted to, you could even just keep it like this. The wire protector is almost fairly hidden underneath the bottom there, but I'm going to add my chain tassel to the bottom. To do that, I think I'm also going to use another bead below it, one of the other ones from that mixed lampwork strand. And we're going to do much of the same thing. For the chain on the other side, I'm going to take 6 inches of chain and make a little cut. And then I'm just going to cut the chain, whether or not you want to do it in varying lengths or the same lengths, that's up to you. If you want to pick a length, you can take your actual piece of wire that you're going to be working with, hang the chain from there. And I don't want it to be too terribly long. So this chain is fairly large that I could count the links, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, make it all consistent if I want. If you have a thinner chain or you purchase a thinner chain from us, you can hang it on a piece of wire like this, let it dangle, and then you can go in and make sure to cut all of your chain to the appropriate length. I'm going to cut, and I don't have any actual number in mind for the lengths of chain that I want hanging from the bottom. So I'm just going to cut apart those 6 inches from that 2.5 feet. 2 feet that I used for the actual necklace portion to make it 24 inches long. And then those extra ones here that I have for the tassel. Those I'll hang down at the bottom to create my tassel. And while they're on, I'm actually going to bend the wire towards the end, and I'll just keep them on. And I'm just holding them in place right there with that wire. So they're all kind of hanging out right there in just a little loop that I made bent up. Taking my pliers then, I'm going to bend the longer piece of wire straight up to work as an eye pin. And I'm going to take that shorter piece of wire that's holding in my chain right now, and I'm just going to wrap that around my longer piece. Just do about 2 coils. That way none of those little pieces of chain are going to fall out either. Cut off that extra wire, put on a bead. It's going to sit right on top of that chain. And then on the other side of the bead, I'm going to make a loop, just like I did previously. Make a small loop or an eye pin. Pop that into the wire protector right along the bottom. And then coil that extra wire along right above and on top of the bead, closing up that eye pin. If you end up doing one like my sample piece, I didn't have to do any wire working because I made it very simple. I took the leather right through that wire protector, and then I just used a jump ring to add on the tassel. And when I get back to our headquarters store, I may even change this out to a tassel as well. I like the big bead on top, but I might look for a tassel color that works on the bottom too. I've really kind of been taken by the tassels. After you're done with that, that's everything. And you have your necklace completely finished, working with those big beads, having fun with the nice agate slabs, and kind of figuring out what to do on the sides of those in order to make those slices nice and fun and functional with just a fun kind of boho chic look by wrapping around those with that nice organized peyote stitch. I like the contrast between the very organized peyote stitch and kind of the unorganizedness of the druzy that sits up and has all those different crystal facets. So got a little bit of wire working in here. With this one, like I said, it's just jump rings and putting through. At the end of the blue one, all I did literally was tie a knot because it was nice and quick, and then I could put it on. You could also tie a slip knot and make it expandable and adjustable. And you can go with varying lengths of chain. If you don't want it as long, you could add a lobster to the back as well. This was a great use for these bigger, thicker druzys, as well as using some of the fun lamp work that I even forget that we have available for us to use. If you get a chance, you can pick up some of these products from us at PotomacBeads.com. You can also interact with us in our Facebook, post some questions if you have any. You can join our Facebook group for beading and jewelry making. And you can also receive regular updates from videos that we do by subscribing to our YouTube channel. Thanks a lot for watching, everyone. Hopefully you learned and it gives you some ideas for wrapping some peyote stitch around holes or stones that have holes in them, and using those wire protectors to cover that up and to hold that peyote stitch in the side. Thanks a lot for watching, everyone, and have fun creating.